Hello, welcome back to the shop, my friends. I'm Buddy here at House of Props, and in today's video I present to you a functioning Legolas Lothlorien bow. I've been wanting to make another bow since it's been a few years since I made Hawkeye's bow from the Disney Plus Hawkeye series, so I decided to make the one we see Legolas carry through most of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The bow was always going to be a display piece, but I wanted it to function if it was ever taken off the wall and fired, so I decided to make the bow out of wood. The whole process is actually really easy, and the final result can fire an arrow about 20 feet. Let me show you how, so let's get started. I'm using a pressure-treated yellow pine 1x6 as my piece of wood. This wood is thin enough and strong enough so that when the bow is cut and finished, it has flex without wanting to snap. I pinned the template in place and traced the shape onto the board with a Sharpie. I wanted a dark reference line so when cutting, it'll be very visible when all the sawdust starts to get in the way. Then I cut the bow out by using a jigsaw. You could use a bandsaw, but I wanted to have a little more close control, which is why I went with the jigsaw. Then, using a belt sander, I begin to round off the edges and smooth the surface. I don't want to sand too much or the bow will not have the correct proportions, and if it's too thin, it could potentially break when the bow is drawn. So I'm just focusing on the squared edges as much as possible. Some of the tighter curved edges are a little difficult to reach with the belt sander, so I switched to a rotary sander and round those off. And since I have it out, I also use it to make sure all the previous edges are smooth and even. By sanding over the flat surfaces, it'll smooth out the natural wood grain in the wood, which we really don't want to be visible in the final prop. And this is how it's looking after the sanding. The sharp edges left behind by the saw have been beveled to create a nice smooth surface, which will be comfortable to hold. Next, I use my Dremel with a medium grit sanding drum to carve in the notches where the string will sit. I'm using the edge of the drum in order to create a V-shaped groove. And as you can see, I have some filigree lines drawn onto the bow. You don't need to worry about doing that. I just did it to figure out my templates. While I keep sanding the groove, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button, if you haven't already. It's completely free to you and will help my channel grow. Plus, when you click the notification bell, you can customize your notifications so you will never miss a new project release. Thank you. Okay, so here's the notch after it's completely sanded. It should be deep enough to fully support the string without slipping and be a nice V shape. Next, I'm going to attach the filigree, which I cut from 2mm EVA foam, and to glue it, I'm going to use contact cement. Some people have used epoxies and clays to sculpt the filigree, but the reason I'm using the EVA foam and the contact cement is both will remain flexible and will bend and move with the bow and are less likely to crack and break away from usage. Once I have an even layer of contact cement on both the foam and the bow, I prepare the pieces for attaching by using a heat gun set on low. This will dry out the cement faster than waiting for it to air dry. If the cement is too wet when the pieces are introduced to each other, adhesion will not be secure, so you want to use the heat gun until the cement loses its wet sheen. Then the foam pieces can be stuck onto the bow. Press them firmly into place and the adhesion should be secure. To carve the details into the appliques, I use this smoothing tip on my Dremel. You could use a wood burner if you want, but I want to keep the details subtle. Using this tip, I lightly press into the foam and carve to make the pieces look more three-dimensional and not like flat pieces of foam. I also use the tip to bevel the outer edges of the pieces as well. This will make them look more natural and not quite so prominently applied. For the grip area, I first apply the small bell shape in the middle and then the double leaf pieces to either side of that. Then the large pieces are attached so the long thin piece is on the front of the bow. Everything is carved with the Dremel, and to seal the foam and prime the wood, I'm going to spray the bow with some Plasti Dip. It'll remain flexible after it dries, so it's perfect for a project like this. Plus, it'll seal the foam, allowing it to receive paint better, and since I use pressure-treated wood, it will also act as a sealant for that as well, because paint would probably peel off and not adhere properly to the wood. I left the Plasti Dip to cure overnight, and then based the bow with a mixture of white, yellow ochre, and burnt umber acrylic paints. Acrylics remain flexible after they dry, which again is great for this project. After the base is dry, I make a wash with some burnt umber and brush this onto the entire bow. Then, by taking a paper towel and dabbing the filigree and wiping lengthwise down the bow on the flat areas, it'll create shadows in the filigree and a subtle wood grain on the wood. It's looking a little too subtle right now, so I'll apply a second layer after the first dries. After the second wash is dried, I brush some metallic tin onto the filigree. I'm using tin instead of silver because the silver would be too bright and would need toning down, but the tin is just the right shade to act like aged silver. Once the tin is dry, I make a wash with some white and a tiny bit of yellow ochre and brush this randomly onto the filigree, then dab it with a paper towel, and this step adds a little variation onto the surface and will break up the texture. And the last paint step is to lightly dry brush some metallic silver onto the edges. Not a lot is required because a little can go a long way, but it just gives the filigree a little something extra. Okay, to make the bowstring, I'm using some theatrical tie line. You can use any woven cord or even an actual bowstring, but you want to avoid any cord that has stretch to it. You want a strong cord without a lot of internal give, which is why I'm using the tie line. First, I make a loop that will fit over the end of the bow, and using an upholstery needle and some embroidery thread to secure the loop, I sew through the tie line like so, and keep working my way down for about 10 stitches. Then I take the thread and wrap it around the cords just like this. You want to keep the loop tight and snugly up against itself as you work your way back down. Once wrapped, I tie off the thread by sewing through the looped thread a couple of times to create a knot, then the excess can simply be trimmed away. You want to make a loop at each end of your cord, and the length of the cord may vary depending on what material you use, but for mine, I used a length of about 76 inches. The string can be mounted to the bow, and then the bow is finished, and as you can see, the build is actually really easy. It's just a piece of wood with some foam filigree attached to it, with a simply made bowstring as well. Get ready for the shop assistant appearance right now. He's just got to check and approve things. Painting the bow is pretty straightforward as well. The wood is painted with a base and a wash to achieve the light colored wood in the films, and the filigree is painted to resemble metallic inlays / embossing, and by adding a couple of layers of paint to it, it creates more depth in the paint job. So with it built and painted, now it's time to test it out. Now, I had hoped to test it outside like I did with the Hawkeye bow, but at the time of filming, the real field temperature was -9 degrees outside in upstate New York, so I ended up filming in the scene shop at my place of employment. The target was just a fast one I whipped together, and I placed it 20 feet away. And as you can see, the bow functions pretty decently, easily hitting the target with some good impact force. A little hint. If you look closely at these shots, you can see a couple more projects that are coming down the line shortly. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you would like to build your own bow, I'll put a link to the template below. Again, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and family, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.